Welcome to the inaugural episode of the Trial-Focused Video Podcast. This is the first in a series of interviews with respected lawyers who litigate and try cases and have important lessons to teach all of us. Our guest today is Jay Diaco. Jay is a well-known plaintiff's lawyer from Tampa who handles serious personal injury and other tort cases. We talk about a range of topics, including his winning closing argument in a high-profile defamation case and his meticulous approach to trial preparation. Stick around to the end to hear about what Trial Focus has to offer and to download our trial evidence ebook. Enjoy the interview. Well, good afternoon. I have the pleasure of speaking to Jay Diaco today. And Jay is one of the most respected trial lawyers in the Tampa Bay area with a track record of successfully handling a wide variety of civil cases, including one of the most publicized trials of the past decade in Tampa. So good afternoon, Jay. How are you?
I'm excellent. How are you, Marcus?
I'm good. I'm looking forward to this.
Me
so
too.
Let's just dive right in.
Sure.
And I'd like to begin, if we could, with your family. You know,
Sure.
Jay, you come from a family of overachievers. You know, your late father was the team doctor for the Tampa Bay Bucks. You practice law with a brother who holds both law and medicine degrees. You know, you have another brother who I've known forever who's committed to community work. So, you know, you come from an impressive family. So my first question to you is, what kind of values has your family instilled in you?
Well, you know, I'm the youngest of three boys, and like you said, they are overachievers. My brother Danny was valedictorian of high school. My brother Steven was the class president, and I was the slacker. But there was this expectation in my house that there was always going to be something past college. There would be graduate school. And so for me, the only graduate school that really fell into my wheelhouse was law school. I didn't have the mathematics skills to do engineering. I didn't have the science skills to do, be a doctor like my father was and my brother was. So for me, I had the social skills and the academic skills that were perfect for being a lawyer. As a kid, it was always about overworking. And I didn't know that my high school put about 35% of its graduating seniors into college. 100% of my family went. And my expectation was to be 100% go to graduate school. It's an interesting thing because my grandmother was straight off the boat from Italy. She was the daughter of a tailor. She had a furrier in Philadelphia at a time when women didn't own businesses. And she commanded that her children learn English and that they educate themselves. And so my dad and his twin brother were first and second in their respective classes all the way through medical school, Hahnemann, University of Pennsylvania, Villanova. My uncle was a really sophisticated cardiologist, helped create interventional cardiology in the form of angioplasts. And he did angioplasty for decades, helping to create it. So I've been surrounded by people who have succeeded by overworking everybody else.
So your path led you to the practice of law, and as those that know you know, into trial work in particular. So how did your journey lead to trial work?
Well, it's interesting. I was thinking about today's society and how oftentimes schools don't want people to be uncomfortable. And believe it or not, I was fearful of public speaking all the way through law school. I won an essay contest when I was in 8th grade, and I hid under the bleachers and cried until my mom made me do the speech. I would get nauseous before trial competitions until my brother told me to embrace the butterflies. The butterflies are what make me perform. And so now, for years, it's been decades, but it took a moment for me to realize that, that's the anxiety that you need to perform well, what people call butterflies. So a guy that was afraid of public speaking, I make my living speaking now.
And you don't necessarily want to lose that, butterfly effect, if you will. It's a form of energy.
You're right. And that was one of the things that, my brother Steven is so wise. He was always so wise beyond his years. And he told me early on to embrace them and be fearful if you don't have them, which is what you're saying. And so I've turned those feelings into empowering feelings. And this is why I'm going to perform, because I'm going to outwork everybody. because that's what my body's telling me to do.
Right, right. So, trial work is your forte, and a significant portion of your trial work is in the field of personal injury law. So,
Sure.
for the audience that may not know that in full, can you give us a sampling of some of your more recent work in that arena?
Sure. For years, I've done medical malpractice as well as complicated injury cases, wrongful death. One of the more recent ones that was so interesting was I represented a young man, 23 years old, who was riding on a motorcycle and he was making an appropriate turn and he was clipped by a tractor trailer. And by chance, the video was caught, a video from a surveillance of a building next door caught everything. And so the evidence was so overwhelming. It took years, and it took me, I want to say, $287,000 of costs, a few dozen depositions of every kind of expert under the sun, and was able to get a very successful multiple $1 million settlement for this young gentleman because his injuries were so catastrophic. So it's everything from a motorcycle or an auto case to the family of a young daughter who went to the emergency room with classic signs and symptoms of an infection. They send her home over a Christmas weekend, and 36 hours later, she's dead. I tell people all the time as a plaintiff's guy, you don't want a good case, because a good case means that somebody you love is scarred or horrifically and forever changed or dead. That's a good case. So that wears on you as you get older, right? Because I live them.
Right. But what you've described, the work you've done to get those kind of results, kind of goes back to the work ethic you talked about that was instilled in you, right? To get those kind of numbers, you had to do the digging and you had to invest the money in the case to get there, right?
Yes, and I took every single deposition. And the thing is my pride and my ego are one of those things that make me overwork. A lot of people would say that's vanity. I think that that's one thing that helps me perform. I don't want to embarrass myself. I don't want to embarrass my client. I want to do more than fulfill my duties and obligations to my client. And I want to be the person that knows more about anything in the room, even when I'm with a neurosurgeon or a board certified orthopedic surgeon or whoever it is. Right. If I have studied well, then they're going to have a tough time in deposition with me.
Right, right. Well, hard work is obviously, fundamental to what you have to do here. But even with all the hard work and that, we still have to deal with tort reform. And Florida's been a hotbed of that of late. So, is that something that you've had to navigate through in your practice? And how have you been able to navigate those sorts of things?
Absolutely have had to navigate it. It was clear last year in 2023 that the insurance industry had a very heavy legislative presence in Tallahassee, and that they were having direct access, in my opinion, plenty of access to the governor and to the administration on what they perceived would be good legislative reform for the insurance industry. And I'm sure you know the nuances of it. I won't bore the audience with the nuances of it, but there were many parts of it that were just way overreaching. And there's a lot of parts of it that were modified during the course of the legislation. So I dealt with it by being involved with those who were helping to formulate the legislation to make sure that it wasn't as bad as it started when it was finished. And I've always taken, good cases. Where it really has had a terrible effect, and I'll just say where it screws victims and where this really irritates me is this: we were a pure comparative fault state. Right. So for those that don't know what that means that if Marcus and I were in a car accident and Marcus was 60% at fault and I was 40% at fault and I sued him, there would be a reduction at the end where, I'm 40% at fault. And so my verdict would be reduced if it was $100,000 by 40%. And I'd get $60,000 because we both bore responsibility or bear responsibility. This new legislation made it modified comparative fault, which Marcus knows means that if there's anything in excess of 50%, the verdict is zero. So with that same scenario, Marcus and I are involved in a car accident. I sue Marcus. I have significant life-altering injuries. catastrophic, can never practice law again. Absolutely have it, no doubt. The light was yellow, and the jury says, you know what, Mr. Diaco, you've got 51% negligence, and Mr. Castillo, you have 49. Well, what happens now? It's a zero verdict.
Right.
Absolutely catastrophic to those people that have really, really bad injuries and have comparative fault, because what's most fair, in my opinion, is pure comparative fault. So that was one of the ones that was overreaching. I think it hurt the citizens of Florida. I think it hurt victims really of slip and falls, which always involve comparative fault. You know, it's hard for me to take any slip and fall now unless I see a video of it, because it was always kind of a 50-50 scenario when you get to a mediation or to a trial. But now you have to evaluate those cases much more carefully. I've never been a huge slip and fall guy, but as far as the quality of cases, you just can't take, like you could before, a pure disputed liability case, because you know that there's certain insurance companies that are going to fight it, relying on this modified comparative fault rule.
Yep. So Jay, many people know you through your trial victory in a highly publicized case known as the MJ versus Bubba the Love Sponge, a number of years ago. And of course, that case saturated the airwaves. But it kind of begs for me the question of, what do you do, and how do you advise folks in high profile cases? And I guess more particularly, should a trial attorney approach trial work in a high profile case differently than in a quote unquote typical case?
I handle every case the same way that I did when I was a trial teamer at Stetson University College of Law's trial team. I graduated in 1995. Stetson University College of Law was recognized by U.S. News and World Reports as being #1 in the nation for trial and appellate advocacy. I'm so proud of that. I'm now back judging competitions. Hope my niece is at Stetson. Hope she becomes a trial teamer, because what I learned through trial team was it's uncomparable to anything else that you get. And so how do I do it? The same way I did before. I prepare a trial notebook where I have literally before my voir dire all the law that applies to voir dire, where I have impeachment the exact way I learned to do impeachment when I was a kid in law school, to make sure there's no stone that's left unturned. Every single witness that I have to depose or that I have deposed, there'll be a copy of the transcript. I'm kind of a hybrid between old dog and new trick. I love paper, but I also love technology to the extent I can keep things in, a cloud-based system, or I can use certain apps to help me. But what I don't like is I don't like relying on AV technicians in trial. For me, there's nothing worse than a pregnant pause when you have a moment in front of a jury, and then you have to wait for an AV technician to say, oh, it's going to take me a second. And then 5 minutes goes by and the moment's gone. And so I still use blow-up boards, and I use an Elmo so that I can put the medical records up that I want, because I need that projector and I need to be the person in control of the courtroom. So I also try to the extent possible, do note-free presentations. Now, that doesn't mean I don't have in front of me a presentation. It means I'm not going to read anything. I may have written, like in the Bubba case specifically, I wrote a 47-minute closing argument. I gave an hour plus closing argument. And the best parts of it were the uncanned parts that came directly from me at the moment that I was communicating with the jury. For the 5 years that I litigated the case, one of my strategies, I bounce ideas off of people. My wife, my brothers, my employees, my friends, and I may have 20 or 30 ways to approach something. And in a trial, 5 or 10 of them may appear. And they're things that I've thought of before, and so they flow right off of my tongue because I try to think about and anticipate what I'm going to need to argue.
It's funny you use the word flow because it kind of harkens to me the phrase flow state. And if you know the case that well and have already thought through a structure for quite a long time, as you've done, then you can be in that state where things just come to you, right?
Yeah. Well, it was the case was about free speech, and it was a radio war between my client Bubba Clam and another DJ, MJ Schnitt. And one of the DJs used the word whore in the case. And so in closing argument, I called myself a whore. I said, I'm a bit of a label whore. And it was just one of those moments that was so pure and so real. And the other thing was about opinion. And I said, you don't have to say, in my opinion, you're not a good lawyer, Mr. Diaco. Or in my opinion, I don't like your tie, Mr. Diaco. You can just say, I don't think you're a good lawyer. And so there were ways that I'm like, so I'm their self-deprecation in a way which relates to the jurors. Right. And then also in today's age of social media, I know, voir dire can be an important thing. And so I don't know if you want to know about voir dire.
Yeah, let's talk about voir dire, because I wanted to go there. Talk to me a little bit about it from your standpoint.
Yeah, so I think one of the reasons we won that trial is we picked a good jury. And for those that don't know what voir dire or voir dire is, it's one of those words like forte or fort or tomato that no one knows how to pronounce correctly, but he and I are speaking of the same thing, and it means to seek the truth, and it's how you pick a jury. And so when you pick a jury, it's really important to pick those people that you think are going to be helpful to your case and try to exclude, to the extent possible, those who you think may be prejudiced against your case. So in today's social media age, at this point in the Bubba trial, I mean, we're talking almost 11 years ago, they had one of the best jury consultants in Tampa, Harvey Moore, that they hired. Right. And he had a whole team of people behind him. And I had a young lawyer that worked in my firm, Brian Matroni. And I called him the Wonder Boy because he was able to find online things that no one could find. And so day 2 of picking the jury, I had a notebook that had a picture of each of the prospective jurors, an impression about what their social media was, what their likes and dislikes, who worked for a Catholic church, who worked for the city, who had who liked country music. And so I learned who these jurors were, and then I tailored a part of my closing argument to each one of them.
That's great.
Super religious, and so I talked about the freedom of religion in the First Amendment. And I knew what. Go ahead.
No, well, and that's excellent. But one of the things I was just going to mention that we've talked about in the past is going back to voir dire. As you hear what folks have to say, that it is sometimes helpful to harvest quotes, if you will, from what they say and seed them into the trial presentation.
I did that.
Something you do?
It is something I do. And so, in that particular case, it was getting people to promise us that they could put their personal feelings aside, because our position was, you may find this offensive, you may find it to be something you don't like, you may find it to be something you wouldn't say, but not liking something and something being defamatory and slanderous are much different things. And so can you assure me that you could put your emotions aside and that you can render your verdict based on solely on the evidence and solely on the law? And so in many cases, that seems like an overly, play on the law. But in the First Amendment, it's really important when you're talking to someone who loves religion and someone who loves music and loves the importance of free speech with lyrics. And that someone else on there has gotten a tattoo during the course of the trial because they posted something about it, and that one of the issues in the case is that the defendant called his wife, said she had a tramp stamp. And so I looked her right in the face and I said, a tramp stamp? I'm not saying that. Those are the words of this man that he said about his wife. Now, I knew she had cellophane on an arm. It was a 3-week trial, and she was so miserable in the existence of this trial that she went out and got a Grievous tattoo from Star Wars on her shoulder. And just knowing a little bit about tattoos, it was probably a 4 to 6 hour tattoo. That means you've really had enough of something. So I knew that she got a tattoo in the middle of the trial because she publicly posts these things. This is all allowable, by the way.
Of course it is.
That's why there's not a big social media presence with me personally. The one I have now is because I'm forced to with a social media person, and I'm sort of enjoying it. But there's not a lot personally out there about me because I've just been a private person. So everything that's out there can be used now when you're picking a jury, and it can be used throughout the trial to help you in how you present your closing argument or you present a witness to these people in the jury box.
I've heard, it used frequently as part of the whole, sort of decision making when you're picking a jury, but I've never heard anybody take it forward and use it, in the presentation stage like you just described. So
that was what Wonder Boy Brian Matroni. I was blown away with it. He literally on one weekend he called me up and he just said, "Do you know what's happening right now?" I'm like, "Of course not. What?" He's like, "This is whatever juror number 3 is getting a tattoo," and we had a big issue about that. How could it be slanderous for Bubba the Clem to say Bubba the Love Sponge to say the word whore, and for this defendant MJ to say about his own wife that she had a tramp stamp when referring to a tattoo, or suggesting that she had slept with Pedro the pool boy, or whatever the other defenses were. And so the big defense was they're both engaged in the same thing, and so it's okay for him to do it, but Mr. Clem can't. And so it was one of those things where at the end of the day they honored their obligation. As I said, you don't censor it, you turn the channel. If you don't like it, you turn the channel. So yeah, it was a really amazing thing, but perhaps mostly because guys like you got to see the trial. Because it was
a learning experience. We're always learning. We don't stop learning in the profession.
No. And what's interesting about it, and you know this, we have trial lawyers in this community who are exceptional, unbelievable trial lawyers that have never had a camera on them. And the fortune of the case, or misfortune for some lawyers, would be, how do you deal with having a camera on your face and being live streamed the entire trial? Can you handle the pressure of thousands or tens of thousands of people watching you live when you're doing the closing argument? Of course. And so for me, that gave me the ability to have people like you, judges, other lawyers, potential clients, people would come up to me in the street for weeks afterwards and say, "I can't believe what you did in closing argument. I've seen a lot of things and I just never saw anything like that." And so for me, it's super humbling, because many lawyers like you, seasoned lawyers, I'll still see who I haven't seen in many years, and they'll say, "God, Jay, that closing argument was unreal."
Yeah. Yeah. And that is the general consensus of the community. It was that good. But I want to ask you one other thing that's been on my mind, which is we know you're a family man,
Sure.
and I happen to know that you're also a surfer. So it
I
occurred to
am.
me this, yeah. So, do you see any connections between surfing and your trial practice? Is that anything you've ever thought about?
I have recently. And it's again sort of like the thing about being afraid of public speaking. In surfing, there's always a point in every session when you're a bit uncomfortable. The waves are big, you've fallen, you're upside down, you may be held under too long, and you have to be comfortable being uncomfortable. And so for years, I've been able to do the classic man versus man, man versus nature. The thing that overlaps with trial work is man versus man in my head. Man versus man. And can I make it through these times? Can I make it past this wave? Can I make it past this bad ruling? Can I make it to the closing argument, or the barrel, or the best part of the wave? How am I going to get there? And so there are a lot of things that are consistent or are constant between the two. But the most important one is having the ability to overcome adversity and being comfortable, uncomfortable.
That's great. So before we close, Jay, we talked about your approach to trial work and a lot of other things. But what advice can you give to aspiring trial lawyers who might see this?
When you're a young lawyer, go to as many things as you can and watch other people. And you're going to learn a lot of things that you don't like. You may see some things you do like, but make sure you take note of the things you don't like and don't do them. And when you see somebody that does something excellent, pay attention to why they're being excellent. And if you do, you're going to realize there's a few things. Number one, they understand the rules. Number two, they understand the law. Number three, they've got a firm grasp on the facts of the case. And number four may be the most intangible, and that is the art of lawyering, knowing the judge, or knowing the witness, or knowing your adversary, and presenting your argument or your presentation to whoever it is you're presenting it to.
Yeah. Yeah. Great words. So Jay, how can our audience contact you as we wrap up?
Diacolaw.com. is probably the easiest way. There's also an Instagram account, 813-221-7978. I've had the same number for nearly 30 years. I do all types of work, personal injury work, catastrophic injury, medical malpractice. And I have a family firm, and we try to treat our clients like family. And I feel if you have a trust in your client, then that trust, I think it translates to your presentation, whether it be to an adjuster, a judge, or a jury.
Well, I'm so thankful you gave us this time today, and I hope that our audience finds it useful, as I know I did. So we'll go ahead and wrap up. We'll put the the contact information up on the screen, and thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for your kind words, and thank you for the opportunity to have this discussion. It was a lot of fun.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
We hope you've enjoyed this interview, which was brought to you by Trial Focus. Trial Focus helps trial attorneys unpack the strengths and weaknesses of their cases through focus groups and mock trials. Trial Focus also offers mock argument services with former trial judges, helping attorneys prepare for important motion hearings and appellate oral arguments. Unlike many trial consultants, we are trial attorneys. We know how to role play the opposition. Your cases need that kind of pushback to get to the true value of your case, to overcome your client's unrealistic expectations, and to prepare to win a trial. If you'd like to learn more about Trial Focus, click on the link below. We look forward to seeing you in the next episode.